Welcome back to the channel, A.R.T's Real Repairs for Real Customers. We've had many requests to demonstrate the matching of a beige color. Well, as it turns out, we have a replacement door panel to match to the original. So this will give us a wonderful opportunity to use some of what we discussed in our last color matching video. So feel free to pause the video, get your nitro gloves, and let's go to work. So in the U.S. market, we have the two most common types of colors in automobiles, grays and tans. In our video on matching gray, we discussed how important it was to first of all establish a value such as indicated on the grayscale. And since that worked so well, we suggested that we create for ourselves a tan scale using brown and white as our value controllers. And of course, to start matching the color on the top of the door panel, it would only make sense to start with a dark brown. So I'm going to be starting from scratch using dark brown pigment. Of course, pigment doesn't have any binder in it, so we'll have to add the binder in a bit. But for right now, we have just pure pigment. So we can get a good look. What you see is what you get with pigments. And we can see that the dark brown pigment is actually too dark for the top of the door panel, meaning we need to lighten it. And using our tan scale idea, we can add some white to do that. So how much white do we add? Well, we don't exactly know. We just have to add some. And through experience, you will get a feel for the various strengths of your pigments if you're not using pigments already. So at this stage of the game, this is mostly just an educated guess. And it looks like we're not far off at this point. Now when we add our binder or our base, this will help us to mix up these pigments a little bit better as well. And to do that, we're going to estimate here what would be a level that would give us a 20% mixture. So whatever we have for pigment in there, that's going to be 1/5 of our total. So it's plastic primer. Since we're going on to plastic, I had reached for my leather base first, but it's plastic primer that we need here. Just estimating here what would end up being a 20% pigment mixture. The other thing about the plastic primer is very, very shiny. And so I'm automatically reaching for a little bit of flattener. And we'll see. We don't know if we've added enough flattener at this point, but this will give us something to get started with. And what I like to do is dab some right on the piece that we're testing. Now, because our binder had a rather milky appearance, it's important that we use the hair dryer to dry it down. That way it'll turn crystal clear, and that will again reveal the true pigment color. Here I'm retrieving a little bit of cleaner to clean up some splatters I made. But if you'll take a close look here, you'll see the main problem is the shininess. So we want to kill that shine. If it's too shiny, and this only is going to factor in when you're using the plastic primer probably. If it's too shiny, you don't get a good look at the color. But it's an important lesson for us that when checking our color or checking our value, we want the sheen of our paint to match the sheen of the plastic. So consider this a special case here where we have to adjust the sheen. Not something you would do every time you mix a color though. Typically you would pick a base that has the correct sheen, but here with the plastic primer, it's going to be shiny no matter what. So it requires a special adjustment step. So once this is dulled down somewhat, we do get a truer look at our value difference. And we're a little bit light. So we had put just a little bit too much white in there on the first go-round. We'll beef that up with a little bit more dark brown because we're still aiming for value. So this is so important to see how this works. Once we have the value established, then and only then will we see any nuances in color. So let's shift gears and start thinking about color. If we look in the plastic, there's a little bit of red in the plastic. So we can add some red to our mix. We could pick a red that's of a similar value to our target color. And what I like to use in this particular instance is a reddish brown. It's considerably a lot of red in there, so a few drops of this is all you're going to need. It works very well in this circumstance. So then our color change, we don't want it to be changing our value too much. That's the goal of that. Let's get a little bigger area this time. That's actually looking pretty good. I think we can use that. So to use a football analogy, solving for value first is like the 80-yard pass play that puts you down on the 1-yard line. And the color matching part is like that rushing play that puts you in for the score. Okay, so now let's consider the next color. We're going to use dark brown and white again as our value controllers, and let's say 50-50 just for a rough estimate. And I need to retrieve some more paper towels for that. Again here, we're going to start with pigments. Of course, you could start with your premix, no problem at all. But we wanted to show step by step here, all along the way, and show everything that comes into play in your color. Now to get a good look, we do not put the pigment on the plastic. We leave the pigment on the stick and leave it wet because if the pigment dries, since it has no binder to it, it might dry looking chalky. We get a true look here at the pigment. It looks like it's still a little dark. So we'll beef that up with a little bit of white in this case again. Still solving for value, right? We're still using our invented tan scale at this point. Okay, so now that our value is very close, we could see a color difference. And remember we talked last time about describing the color in terms of one of the 6 pigments. So if we describe the plastic in terms of yellow, then we should expect to see its complementary color, violet, in the paint. And we do. So we add yellow because the plastic wants yellow, but we also add yellow because we need to subtract the violet. And yellow is the complementary color to violet. It will subtract or reduce the violet. So then it's nice to see that both from an additive point of view and from a subtractive point of view, yellow is the answer. I'm using a yellow oxide. That's the middle of the road kind of yellow for value. There are several other yellows that you can use that are very light and that will throw your value too far light. Yellow oxide might even be a bit dark here in this case. It's very possible. But it's generally the middle of the road yellow, as far as value goes, that is your go-to color. And we could take a quick look there, as you saw, on the stick and see if we've got an ample amount of yellow. Might even be a bit dark here at this point. So I'm going back for value. The yellow did darken us a little bit. So a little white to offset that for value. Now we're still working with pigments, so we can still look directly on the stick. We don't put the pigments on the plastic, as we mentioned. And we're getting very close here. So are we close enough to make us a premix out of this? So we see how much pigment we have, and we want to make that 1/5 of our total if we're aiming for about a 20% ratio here of pigment to base. And before we get too far, let's not forget to put in our flattener. Now, if you wanted to, you could pour out some of the plastic primer into another bottle and mix some flattener with it, so you would have that ready ahead of time. That would be your call. Now we're doing this step by step today, but in everyday practice, I would make a mental picture of this formula for this color, and I would put my brown, white, yellow, and plastic primer together all at once, and that would be my premix that's ready for testing. So now we're at the point where we have a premix. We have our binder, and this we can test right on the plastic. And again, we'll need to dry it down so that we can see the true colors. So this being our first real look at our paint, we want to ask ourselves, what's the biggest difference that needs to be solved? Is the value different? Is it too dark? Is it too light? Or is it the color that's the main difference? And let's plan on solving for that first. Now I'm running here to get a light just to show that if you were in a residence where there was not much light, you could use one of these handheld full spectrum lights just to get a different perspective and to help you in ascertaining your target. So what I'm looking at is that my paint here is a little dark. And the other thing I'm seeing is that the plastic has a little hint of red in it. Now, if the plastic has a little hint of red, do I see green in my paint? And yes, I do. So then, let's erase the green by adding some red. I'm going to pick some of the true red. I'm not going to add a lot of it. All you need is a couple of drops to erase the hint of green. On the same trip, I'm adjusting the value with a little bit of white, and you expected that. So in this instance, because our value and color were close already, we can adjust the value and the color on the same trip. A twofer. If the color wipes on a bit light, that's a good thing because it will dry down a little bit darker since the milky base clarifies when you dry it. On the other hand, if it looks a little dark still, you might wait and see how it sprays out before adjusting it any further. Nonetheless, this is close. This is really in the ballpark here, so I think we can use it. So let's move on to the good door panel. So here I'm going to give the replacement door panel a couple of applications of adhesion promoter. Like the drill press operator, I spared you the boring bits. But this came from the salvage yard and it needed a couple of scrubbings with a degreaser and a prep step before this. All very vital. Now the first color going on doesn't require any masking. This first color, I actually want to bleed right on over to the bottom part of the door panel. And the reason for this is that when I end up masking, I don't want to have to mask directly on the edge of a finish. I want the finish to bleed over to the next piece so that I'm masking in the middle of the coating. And my wife had a new hair dryer, and I thought I'd give it a little try here. She said it dried her hair quicker. It's one of those ionic hair dryers, so I said, well, let me give it a try. Besides, I like the color. So it looks like 2 coats is going to do it here for the top. And as it is, I'm setting a world record here for the longest time using a hair dryer without getting paint on it. Now I wanted to flash back to 12 years ago where I did the whole door panel with the lighter color this time, and then masked right on top of that color for the dark color on top, and not a problem with masking. So of course this required some very close masking. And a first light coat of color just for proper adhesion. Usually I anticipate 3 coats when I'm changing color. For this particular door panel, though, it seemed like 2 coats is sufficient. And I've got to refill the cup halfway through this coat. Now here's the beauty of that masking technique. When I lift the masking tape, none of the fresh finish peels off. And it was only 15 minutes from when I painted the brown to when I taped it. And before leaving the shop, this is what we've been working around here. I've just finished up this little lawn bridge for my mother-in-law. The purchasing department would be proud that I bought the right size box of screws and only had 4 left. That's the most exciting part about the whole project. So you see here we have a lot of color left over. We didn't use but a couple of ounces of paint the whole time. But be sure to save this aside as a plastic coater so you don't get it confused with your leather dyes. So this wouldn't be flexible enough for leather, but if you wanted to use it on leather like I did the next day, you can adjust the color, add some of your leather flexible base to it, but also add a bit of flex additive. I like to use it up because paint doesn't make me any money when it's sitting in the jar. It would be nice to see the door panel installed, but the vehicle is away in the body shop, and so I've left them here in the office. But just to review some highlights of what we've discussed, let the value matching do the heavy lifting for you. The color is usually just a small adjustment at the end. And it's nice to see how everything comes into play to make this color coding, this plastic, this problem plastic, a success. The thorough cleaning and scrubbing, the prep step, the adhesion promoter, the painting over onto both sides so that you mask within the middle of your paint instead of on the edge of your paint. And in this way, we are able to mask directly on the fresh coating. We've dried it down with a hair dryer, but we can mask directly on it using the proper base, of course, which is the plastic primer, which is the strongest base that we can use for the plastic. There is no problem then using these water-based products on plastic, but we have to follow every one of those steps precisely to get these results. Anyway, I hope that was very helpful to you and to those who requested to see the demonstration on matching this sort of a tan or a beige color. I hope this answered your questions. Thank you for watching.